So I've got a new lens from Sirui. This is their latest 75mm anamorphic lens, and this is the second lens in their lineup of their full frame anamorphic lenses that they're started releasing. The first one that they released was this 50mm, and I already did a review of this one, and this one is so similar to the 50mm that you know, aside from the focal length and maybe a little bit more subtle lens flares, that pretty much, if you watch the review of this lens, you'll know what I think of this one. But in short, the lens is great. It's exceptionally sharp. It's nice and fast at t2.9. It has a squeeze aspect ratio of 1.6x. Again, the same as this lens. Now, because this lens is meant to be used sort of as a kit together with the 50mm, you'll notice that from the mount, the lenses line up perfectly, meaning the focus and the aperture rings are in the exact same spot. The major difference in the design is that the 75mm is a little bit longer on the front end. So if you're working on a fast-moving production, then swapping out these lenses is pretty fast. Now, if you're wondering about this sort of unusual squeeze aspect ratio of 1.6x, well, Sirui kind of designed this so that you can still use it on most mirrorless cameras, which are going to be shooting in 16:9 aspect ratio, and then you're going to end up with a 2.8 to 1 widescreen ratio, which is slightly more widescreen than your traditional sort of anamorphic footage. You can always zoom in a little bit, or if you're using some of these mirrorless cameras that can shoot even higher than 4K, then you can punch in and still get the traditional 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio. Now, if you throw this on a few of the mirrorless cameras out there that have the 3 to 2 aspect ratio, then you'll actually end up with a 2.4 to 1 widescreen. Now, for all the footage that you guys are watching in this video, I used the Sony a7S III, and I was obviously shooting in 16:9 with this lens. So again, the wide aspect ratio is actually 2.8 to 1. Personally, I think it looks beautiful. Now again, if you don't want to go that wide, you can always punch in. Now, something else to keep in mind is that this is an anamorphic lens, and like is the case with most anamorphic lenses, you're not going to be able to get in very close and be able to actually get you know, a focus with this lens. The minimal focus distance for this is 2.8 feet or 0.85 meters. So keep that in mind. Now, of course, you can get closer if you get basically diopters. So here I got these cheap diopters on Amazon. They cost like $21, I believe, with tax. And they work great. So these are actually the diopters that I used for some of the shots in this video whenever I did get like real extreme close-ups. And like I said, you can buy a whole set of these, and they're 82 millimeters, which is the front thread here of this lens. And they just thread on very easily. They're quick and easy to kind of swap out. Of course, if you're using diopters and you want to go from real extreme, you know, focus, let's say something that's really like within inches of the camera, and then you want to be able to rock focus this, let's say infinity, you won't be able to do that because again, you have a diopter under. But again, for me, I haven't run into any problems like that, and there's always workarounds with that. So again, don't let that kind of scare you, and keep in mind that most anamorphic lenses have this sort of limitation of not being able to focus very close to the lens. Now the aperture on this lens goes from t2.9 to t16, so it is a pretty fast lens, again considering it's an anamorphic lens. And also remember this is t2.9, not f2.9, so t2.9 is actually faster than f-stop. And also another great thing about this lens is that even if you're shooting all the way open, which definitely when I was shooting in low light situations, I pretty much had it most of the time all the way open. The footage looks sharp, and the same thing when I was shooting in daylight. I had the option obviously of closing down the lens, but I didn't need to. So for a lot of the shots where I wanted to get that really shallow depth of field, I had the lens all the way open, and it was still beautiful and sharp on the parts that were in focus. And the sharpness extends beautifully in this lens all the way from the center to the corners of the frame. So really well designed lens and exceptionally sharp, again considering that this is an anamorphic lens. In a way, it's pretty much what I come to expect now from these anamorphic lenses from Sirui, whether it's the 50mm full frame anamorphic lens that they released in this series, or some of their previous lenses, which were the 1.33 squeeze aspect ratios. Again, all of them were exceptionally sharp, even all the way open. Now let's sort of talk about the aesthetics, I guess, and the overall image quality. Like I said, the sharpness is beautiful, it's there if you want it. The lens itself, though, does produce those very characteristic anamorphic sort of elements. Main ones being obviously is the oval bokeh that you're going to get on the highlights or out of focus elements. And another thing obviously is the horizontal lens flares. You're going to get them if you want them with this lens. Now it is a little bit more subtle than the 50mm full frame lens that they released before this one. And I think that's a great thing, because again, if you really want a really noticeable horizontal lens flare or a streak across your frame, then if you open the lens a bit more and you expose correctly for that, then you're still gonna get it. But if you don't want it, then just by kind of tilting the lens off away from the light, or by using matte backs and things like that, you can very easily control it and avoid any of the lens flares. What I do like though about whether it's the lens flares or some of the highlights that it produces is this sort of a very smooth and organic look. It doesn't look very overly too sharp or digital. And again, very similar to their 50mm full frame lens that they released. If you can adjust the angle of this lens and you have the front of the lens just off a little bit from your main light source that's hitting it, then you can really get this very subtle, kind of almost kind of smooth, I would say, these sort of flares and kind of glows appear in your shots, which personally I love, and I think it just makes the overall very digital looking cameras these days, makes them look a little bit more organic. Now these lenses are designed for full frame mirrorless cameras, and the version that I have up here is the Sony E mount, but they also make an L mount, Z mount and RF mount. Now when it comes to the build quality, this lens is very solidly built, just as their previous 50mm lens. It's a full metal body construction. It is a little bit heavier, I mean that plus obviously all the glass elements that it's got, but again it's something that you're not going to have to worry about basically falling apart if you're working with it a lot. Now if you're worried about the weight of this lens, then there is a lens support here with a 1/4-20 attachment, so if you have a really small or very light mirrorless camera, then you can attach that. You could even hold the whole thing, you know, this way, basically using the lens, or you can obviously, the ideal would be to attach both the lens and the camera itself to a base plate or some kind of rail system. So at the price point that Sirui released this lens along with the previous 50mm lens, I think it's really exciting now for filmmakers to be able to jump into full frame anamorphic cinema, you know, again at an affordable price range, especially considering how much all other full frame anamorphic lenses cost. So definitely, if you wanted, for example, to experiment with anamorphic, or you're ready for it and you want to kind of go and be able to shoot a whole project on it, then keep an eye out for this lens, and I'm very excited actually for the future lenses they're going to release in this lineup, because they did promise to release more of these lenses, which means that one day when all of those lenses are finally released, we'll be able to have a nice sort of a range of these lenses in different focal lengths, so that we can actually shoot a proper project on it. Now, if you want to get this lens right now, then you can save yourself a lot of money by joining their crowdfunding campaign. I'm going to post a link for that in the description. Or as always, you can wait and buy it later on at the regular retail price. But either way, I think if you're interested in anamorphic lenses, definitely check out this 75mm and also their previous 50mm full frame anamorphic lenses. Well, once again, my name is Tom Antos. If you guys enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you haven't done so already, check out my website at tomantosfilms.com, where you can find out a lot more info about this lens, their previous lenses, or anything really filmmaking related. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!